Greetings everyone. On behalf of W4W Foundation, a think tank instituted as Citizens Collective, we welcome you to another session of Friday Waters. The conversation today is part of Water Art series and the session is titled Dancing Rivers, Odissi, Climate and Embodied Practices of Peace and Resilience. The Friday Water series includes water talkies, water reading club, water thesis club, water arts, and meet a maestro, each of them taking place once a month depending on the availability of our speakers. The focus of Friday Waters is on bringing the artists who have done or are doing any form of art or music on water matters in the session in order to discuss with them the making of their artwork, the concerns they are portraying, the celebrations they are having, in order to understand water in different way. Besides bringing interest in the water conversations, we hope to increase the outreach of the art form, the artist in the water networks and in the society at large. If you know someone who has water endeavors along these lines, please share with us to listen and learn from them and provide a platform to further increase their outreach of their work. At W4W, because we believe that water conversations are crucial for water conservation and that water connects, do visit our website. For all the past sessions, we are nearly 450 sessions old, making us the longest water conversation in the world, touching around 700 speakers on our platform with nearly 10,000 participants who have seen our work. This is Mansi Balbharga from the House of W4W and the host for your session. As we discuss today a very interesting topic about dancing rivers, we have to acknowledge that around the world, the rivers are important indicators of not only civilizational development to the extent of climate change, but also they are seen both as dividing the land, but also known as building cooperation, peace over their shared utilitarian and ritualistic connects. With the advent of climate change, rivers are also showing a path for resilience, building, and sustainability. Anyway, we will discuss more about it with our two wonderful young speakers today, Mariam Shakiba and Dr. Anisha Samantara, and they will initiate a conversation amongst themselves and then we will open the floor for discussion. So there is a shout out for all the people who are also watching us on YouTube and LinkedIn. You may also post your questions and queries in the chat box there. Before I invite both the girls to have the conversation, let me just introduce both of them. It is an honor and also pleasure to also invite Anisha back home. So welcome back, Anisha, and also thank you so much for taking initiative to organize this session. And this is how W4W has actually managed to reach 450 sessions. We have Mariam Shakiba, who is a London-based performing artist dedicated to sharing the beauty and richness of Odissi dance. Her practice focuses on the experience of inhabiting the body through dance and movement and the process of developing emotional sensitivity through rigorous immersion in dance. Her work explores embodied movement and emotional expression through the classic Indian form while also drawing on her Persian heritage. A performer and creator, she has presented work at various venues including the South Bank Centre and the British Museum and is part of the 2023-25 Settlers Wells South Asian Dance Development Program. Mariam is also a dedicated yoga practitioner and qualified yoga teacher. Welcome back, Anisha, and welcome to Dr. Anisha Samantara, and she's a lecturer at the Department of Peace Studies and International Development at the University of Bradford, UK, and a trained Odissi dancer. Her research lies at the intersection of urban anthropology, water poverty, and collective action. She is currently working on applying arts-based approach to socio-ecological spaces. Anisha's approach to human development and social justice is guided by a decolonial lens and is also informed by her experience as a scholar from the Global South. She teaches modules on sustainable development and policy analysis and co-teaches African Development Bank modules on development practice. She is an active member of the British Academy's Early Career Researchers Network and Development Studies Associations. Thanks both the girls, and I'm so much looking forward to having this session and see how the conversation flows like water. And then I will, of course, jump into the conversation. Over to you, Mariam. As I understand, you will open the floor, or over to you, Anisha. Take your call, and floor is yours, or the screen is yours.
Thank you so much, Mansi. This is a privilege for both of us to be here today. And I must acknowledge and also appreciate the wonderful work that you are doing with organizing these sessions. It forms a very, very important part of the knowledge repository that we have for water and beyond. So let me open the session and talk about what Dancing Rivers really is. And so, in essence, Dancing Rivers is a practice based workshop. It is a workshop which explores Odissi, which is one of the Indian classical dance forms, as a tool to understand ecological memory and peace, specifically within the context of water related crises and climate affected communities. It was almost a long-standing desire of mine to combine my experience as a water researcher and then my experience and also Mariam's experience as Odissi dancers into one cohesive piece. So this is the culmination of that. And more so in a polarizing world where anthropogenic climate change is rife, and then we also have a lot of other multiple crises. So within that context, it's important to use more creative pedagogies. So Dancing Rivers and the workshop, the methodology, all of that feeds into this knowledge web around using performing arts, culture, and heritage-based methods to study climate action. And we, especially from the global south, I think that representation is also very important. And what we wanted to do with the workshop to start off was to have a kind of an immersive sensory dome. So we call it this artistic dome that we wanted to immerse our participants in. And this was a step-by-step process. And Mariam is going to take us through that process. But to briefly outline it, the idea was to make sure that we have different sensory elements that pertain to sound. Of course, that means using ragas, melody, music that has water-based symbolism, but also using sari as a living archive. And that was something that was very, very close to our hearts, and we really wanted to put that in there. And I'll talk a little more about the sari as an ecological archive in itself as well later on in the session. But the idea was to make participants go through these different planes and evoke water emotions. And what that would translate into is this idea of bhava in Indian classical dance forms, so bhava emotions, and then use that to move into mudras, and which are gestures, and then finally into more kind of broader forms of movement. So effectively, participants would be drawing from their experiences, their imaginations, memories, and their relationship with water, which would count as their water narratives, and then translating that into water emotions, and finally translating that into movement through Odissi. That's what Dancing Rivers is, and I'm just so grateful that we've been able to put this together. It wasn't easy. It's a very complex process of doing it, but we're very happy to talk about it. And before we move forward, I'd also like to thank the Quaker Peace Studies Trust for funding the workshop, and to all the participants who came with open hearts and participated. And it was such a humbling experience for both of us. So over to Mariam now.
Thanks so much, Anisha. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the different kind of components of the workshop. And, Anisha really kindly outlined everything at a high level. So we're going to dive in a little bit more and see what we were really trying to experience within each of the planes. So as Anisha mentioned, we had 4 planes that we wanted to take the participants through. So first of all, looking at the first plane, listening to the river, this kind of grounding experience. The second plane, translating these kind of emotions and experiences into movement, translating that movement into emotion, and then finally translating that emotion into Odissi. So really bringing them into this very specific artistic and movement practice. So the first plane, which was around listening to the river. So in this plane, we wanted to really explore water emotions and narratives, immersing ourselves in a space of calmness, solidarity, and empathy. So this very much started with all participants to feel that we were generating values of respect, of inclusion, and also of non-judgment. So really inviting that sense within our participants. and also introducing this idea of positive peace. So generating not only calmness, but also equity, empathy, and solidarity. So really kind of holding these values at the core of the workshop. We did this through a few practices. So we started standing in a circle. We were taking deep breaths together. And then we also started to introduce some water imagery. So standing in a circle, we were transferring waves, so kind of making these wave gestures with the hands and transferring them between us in the circle. And then starting to explore this idea of river pathways. So again, using our hands as gestures to show kind of river pathways and inviting the participants to really move through the space and get really ground themselves in the space that we were in, and transitioning between individuals that are moving through the space, and then using my verbal cues, really inviting people to find each other, and exploring this idea of you start as kind of small tributaries coming together into these much larger bodies of water. So really inviting participants to have that embodied experience of that way that water moves on the planet. We then also invited people to share their own experiences with water. So this was around building that empathy with each other. So inviting participants to share their own experiences of water, of maybe floods, or maybe challenges that they've experienced wherever they might have grown up. And then share also what emotions or emotional states are brought up when they were thinking of these kinds of relationships that they have with water. And that introduced for the first time this idea of bhava from Indian classical aesthetics. What is the emotional state that is evoked when thinking about these particular themes and stories. Then we went into the second plane, so translating into movement. So this is where we introduced Odissi for the first time. So we thought, okay, let's introduce it a little bit early on, so people actually know what is this dance form that we're talking about. So we wanted to give people a taste of this very specific cultural and artistic practice. And Anisha is going to talk a little bit later about these questions that are on the screen. What relationship does a native dance have to its land, and what are ecological memories? And then I also wanted to, ask people and share my own kind of perspectives as well. How does this particular cultural practice and way of moving relate to how that culture perceives the world, and how does its values align with peace practice principles? Because that's also something that we were really trying to weave through the workshop, peace, water, and Odissi as a peace practice. So yeah, just introducing the kind of principles behind that. Then we had a little dance excerpt from the Odissi repertoire. So a small excerpt of the piece called Dira Samire. And this piece was chosen for its representation of a body of water, the Yamuna River. And this river is the core setting of the narrative of this particular dance piece. So yeah, Dira Samira Yamuna Tira, where the wind is gentle on the banks of the river Yamuna. So we had a little excerpt of that. It's a beautiful painting that depicts an episode from the literary masterpiece Geet Govind, which was composed by the poet Jayadev in the 12th century, which is where also this particular choreography is drawn from. So you can see how water is a very kind of integral part of this particular spiritual tradition. Little clip, so we might at the end go to try and show a clip of this dance. So let's move on to the next element of the workshop. So this was where we introduced the Bhumi Pranam. So this is a core principle of Odissi. So this idea of respecting the earth, of taking blessings from the earth, and also opening a dedicated space for practice. So this was where we started to introduce participants to actually Odissi as the dance form. So I guided the participants through the particular movement sequence of the Bhumi Pranam. So you would start to get this really embodied sense of how this dance form connects to the earth and to the space around us, and this idea of building relationship with the planet. From here, we went on to an exciting part of the workshop. So this was the Sari landscape. So this was where we introduced this idea of using saris to represent bodies of water, the rivers, a sea, a lake. And I also introduced this idea of a challenge scenario. So, I wanted to add a little bit of excitement, a little bit of spice to the session. So it was this challenge scenario around having access to water. So obviously, as we all know, water is so fundamental to human life, and access to water is essential for all kinds of communities. Obviously, we know historically communities and civilizations are built around bodies of water. So I introduced this challenge scenario where we split the participants into 4 groups. And then we had 3 saris to symbolize different types of water bodies. So I invited the participants to, using only gesture, to make sure that everyone in their group had access to a body of water. So obviously you have 4 groups, you have 3 bodies of water, and there is this challenge, this moment of scarcity, and how do you navigate that? And, really emphasizing to our participants, this is a matter of life or death. You have to have access to water. It's so important. How do you do that? So I asked them, the key questions here. What tools do you have for communicating with your bodies? And how do you work together to make decisions? And that's both within your own group and also with others as well. Because I anticipated there would be an element of, negotiating between groups to see how you would all have access to a body of water. So that was the challenge scenario. We'll talk a little bit more about that later in the kind of like reflections of the workshop. How did it actually go? So yeah, and then after that exercise was done, then I invited the participants to, in their groups, work together to create a landscape in the room. So laying the saris out as flow lines representing topographies and riverbanks. So a few pictures here of how the saris were used and how they were kind of navigating in the space. And you'll see also in the pictures we have beautiful handloom saris from Odisha. These were all cotton saris, and Anisha and I, we were wearing Tussar silk handloom Odisha saris as well. Really, yeah, represent that. Hopefully, I'm sure Anisha is going to talk about that a little bit more. So then we went into the 3rd plane, which was translating into emotion. So introducing this concept of the Navarasa, the emotional framework of Indian classical dance and also of Odissi. So introducing this traditional list that's drawn from the Natya Shastra, introducing these 9 emotional states, doing a little, in the workshop, I did a little demonstration of each of the different emotions. And the question that I asked participants in this section was, what emotional states from here did they relate to when they reflected on their own personal stories around water? From here, we went into the 4th plane, so translating into Odissi. So moving in Odissi. So this was where I asked, what tools do you need to tell your story? In Odissi, we have a lot of very specific ways that we use our gestures, use our bodies to tell stories and to really convey these very, deep narratives. And this was something that I felt was really important is, we're actually, through this practice, we're focusing on Odissi as this very specific way of communicating. How can this empower participants to tell their own stories? So here I introduced, wanted to give participants some tools that would support them in the subsequent parts of the workshop. So ways of moving through space, ways of offering prayers and offering respects, specific gestures that are used to denote actions like, stop, go, come, stay, walk, all of these very very practical ways that we use gesture to express and give narratives. How we use nature, how we use the body to represent nature. So how we use the body to represent rivers, seas, rains, winds, trees, flowers. And really, again, emphasizing the importance of the representation of nature within this dance form, and how this dance form is very, very closely tied with the natural world. And also introducing the Sutradhar character that we have in Indian classical dance in Odissi, the narrator, who is the conduit for actually telling the story. Once upon a time this happened, people came together. How do we as a narrator express these sentiments? Then we had another kind of more creative part where participants could do a little bit more of their own exploration. The pranam section. So we now wanted to introduce this, give the participants an opportunity to create their own pranam, a water pranam, and using these similar principles of, giving respect to something, connecting with something, taking blessings from something, and really relating that to water. So within the groups that they were in the earlier part of the workshop for the challenge scenario, inviting them to work in groups to create their own water pranam. So that was also quite fun. And when Anisha and I came up with this idea, we were like, oh my god, we came up with an amazing idea. so yeah, that was great. So yeah, that was a really good way to also let the participants start to use some of these tools that we've been giving them to actually start to create something that was from their own expression. So the next component of the workshop was around telling your story. So we invited participants to tell the story of their group's own water journey, bringing in different components like the emotions that were brought up, describing the environment, maybe pulling in reasons for displacement, any key characters that they wanted to identify, any kind of key points of the story. Maybe there was a kind of, culminating element, maybe there was a kind of peak point, a low point. There are any points that they really wanted to emphasize, and was there a resolution at the end of that? So, and then also asking, are there any more tools that you need to tell your story? I already gave a few tools, were there maybe more tools that were needed? So this is also a kind of question here as well. So this was and again, this section was very much around giving people that agency to really tell their own story. And this was something that we felt was a really integral part of what we wanted people to take away from this workshop, is that telling, the power of telling your own story, the power of sharing your emotions and how things made you feel, and using storytelling as a way to connect with your peers and with each other, especially relating to water and climate crisis. And then finally pulling the session into Odissi as a peace practice, and bringing people back to this idea of Odissi being a real medium to inform peace practice, since this was also a real core element of the workshop, Odissi as a peace practice. So talking about Odissi as a way to generate inner peace through bhakti. It has roots in the bhakti movement, very strong roots within that. Meditative awareness that Odissi brings, this mindfulness that we can then bring to every other part of our lives. The dance form is very much about harmonizing opposing forces and energies within the body, and how that internal harmonizing can then reflect how we harmonize external forces. Expression of emotion. So how do we feel these emotions really deeply without being completely consumed by them? And then finally, that connection to nature and sacred. So how do we use the body to symbolize harmony, dissolving conflicts within the body, and how do we use that to tell also complex stories? And then we finished with a structured reflection. So really inviting participants to share, sit down together and share what insights came from their experience with their body in this workshop. Anything around resilience, also reconciliation as well. So that's a little bit of a run through of the session, and we ran the session also over a 3-hour workshop, so it was quite a long workshop. We really wanted to have time to really immerse ourselves in this space, in this kind of space that we'd created. So yeah, that was what we did. So yeah, thank you so much. I'm gonna actually we can continue. I'm going to pass on now to Anisha, who's going to talk about the ecological memories.
Thank you, Mariam. It just takes me back to the time when we were with everybody in the room. So it's, evoking a lot of emotions in me as well. Just briefly, before I speak about ecological memories, I also want to stress on the fact that Odissi, even within the UK, is an underrepresented dance form. And of course, it's not to say that there aren't communities that practice Odissi and there aren't artists and performers, but it's on a very small scale. So the other aim of the project was also to demystify what Odissi really is and make it more accessible in a way that is also connecting what it means to use Odissi, not just as an artistic form of expression and a tradition, but to use it as a means of resilience. So you could use some frameworks within Odissi to really reconnect with your emotions and honor these stories through your body. And so that does take me to what ecological memories really are. So in simple terms, ecological memory is how the environment and how humans remember change. It can be through stories, through myth, through folklore and rituals, and so on. So it's how the memory is passed on across generations of humans and how they live with the land, forests, rivers, and other landscapes. So in that sense, it is cultural, it's emotional, and it's also climatically produced, and it's embodied, which means that it is carried through the body. And Odissi in itself has a lot of those meanings and that sort of repository of centuries of knowledge within it. And the way that we see it is, so Odissi originated in the coastal regions of India, specifically the Orissa region of India. And when you see the dance form and you see how the body moves, so the first thing is you look at the chauko position, which is, you're bending in this kind of square. You create a square with your legs and you connect to the ground. Then you have the body, and the body moves in, it's called the Tribhanga. So you break the body in 3 different parts. So your hips, your torso, your neck, and your legs. So all of that kind of really connects with a lot of nature-based symbolism. So the breeze, the oceans, and all of that is embedded within the practice. But also, when an artist is performing, the artist is not only performing the art of Odissi, but it's transferring this century-based knowledge and ecological memory through the dance to the audience that's watching it. So it is shared. It is, it connects people, and then the audience then remember that memory of whatever they've learned from the performance and carry it with them. So that's how historically it's done. And now, again, because it's a performing art, it has that element to it. But when you look at doing a workshop, it's not as performative in that sense. It doesn't come with the paraphernalia. But what it comes with is using the other bit of Odissi to connect with our bodies. And doing it in a simple way was what we were trying to achieve with the workshop. I'll now move on to talking about the sari as a living archive. And it's very, I think, special to my heart. It's also something that connects me to the women in my family and in my sort of, lineage, because Anyone who's grown up in South Asia remembers growing up around women who wear saris. And not only are saris an ode and a testament to weaving and the human and ecological labor that goes into the craftsmanship of producing these saris, but they're also a form of resilience within themselves because they tell a very strong story. And they also tell the story of the land that they emanate from, they originate from. And the weaving communities, as we know, are also vulnerable to climate change. So that's something that we wanted to highlight. And I don't like to say, the costume, because it's not really the costume that we wear in Odissi. We adorn an attire, and it's more than just a costume. So when you look at the saris, most of them are Sambalpuri saris, handloom silk saris that are used to create the attire and that the artists wear. And the motifs that you'll see really capture the landscape. So you have the temples, so you have these triangular motifs around the sari borders that represent temples. You'll find lotuses, you'll find waves, you'll find birds. So a lot of that is part of that sari's heritage. And the colors that are captured are also very deeply connected to nature. And the last thing I do want to highlight, by using fabric storytelling and the history of material in our workshop, so the participants could feel the saris, they could really interact with the saris. That was one part of the process. But when you're touching a sari and you're interacting with it, you're also connecting physically and emotionally to all of that the sari carries with it. So spotlighting that, appreciating and acknowledging the labor, ecological and human, like I mentioned, is really honoring these indigenous traditions that are part of the Odissi practice. So yeah, that's it from me on ecological memories and the sari. We'd like to create some space now for the reflections from the workshop. So if Mariam would like to start, and then I can, sort of take on after that, or however we wish to do it. So yeah, over to Mariam.
Thanks so much, Anisha. My internet connection is a little bit, so apologies if I cut out at any point. I think the main thing that one of the things that I wanted to reflect on, so with the challenge scenario, so this was one, there are a few elements, most of the workshop, you could kind of know how it was going to go generally, but the challenge scenario, this was the big question mark, like how was it actually going to play out in real time? How long was it going to take? We've kind of given this much time for it. Is it going to take all of that time? Would it need more time? Would it need less time? And yeah, how are people going to, how will people respond to it? So I think that was the bit that I was very intrigued to see how it would play out. And there was actually a lot of very quick collaboration, which was very interesting, between the different groups. So I wasn't sure, is there going to be friction? Is there going to be drama? But actually there was a sense of, wanting to work together. One of the groups very quickly was very happy to break apart and join other groups, which was almost a little bit funny that they were so ready to just like break up. So yeah, you go over there, it's fine, bye. Separate their groups. But it's just very interesting to see how that played out. And also this sense that they really actually wanted to connect with each other. And I think that really kind of made me feel like people want to build relationships, people want to connect with each other, they want to support each other however much they can. So that was a really interesting component. One of the challenges that we had was that we had a 3-hour workshop. It actually wasn't enough time. We didn't get to everything that we'd wanted to get to. So the telling your own story component, that section, was not fully experienced. So that was one part that we like, oh, that would have with our with our plans. but yeah, I think that was that was one element that it would have been really good to have more time to get into that and support the participants to really tell their own stories. I think another thing, and one final thing I'll reflect on, and then I can pass to Anisha, is when we were inviting participants to share their own experiences and relationships with water. Water, the theme that really came up for a lot of people was this principle of water generating a sense of calm, generating a sense of inner peace, and all of these kind of things. And, really kind of reminded us that while in the kind of current climate crisis world, water and the rising sea levels is very scary and causes a lot of challenges for a lot of people with climate migration and all of these issues that are happening at the moment. At its core, as people, we really love water and we really connect with water, and water gives us a lot of sense of inner peace and clarity, and something that we want to be around, something that we want to look at, something that we want to feel if we want to immerse ourselves in it. So that was another thing that really came across for me as well. And I'll pass over to Anisha.
Thanks, Mariam. So I have my notes from the workshop, and I have it in analog form because I feel like that's for me it resonates better with the experience overall. And I feel like if I put it down on a computer, I'm going to miss all of the elements that we touched upon. So I still have it in my notes. But I wanted to specifically, and these are what was said by, these kind of notes are what was said by the participants. So I thought it would be nice to really highlight some of these and see it through their lens instead of me giving my reflections. But the idea here is to say that this wasn't something new that we were trying to teach or impose on our participants. It's really reflective of the memories and the imaginations that our bodies already carry. It was just to bring it to the forefront. So I'll start. The participant said, it's very disheartening to see polluted rivers. Rivers are like living entities, so when they're polluted, it feels like rivers are bleeding. Water is political. Water is rejuvenating. They talked about how they love animals like frogs around ponds, and when it rains, it just changes the landscape completely. Our stories give us resilience, connecting with birth and death, and that's very tied to the Indian context as well when it comes to water, touching water, and what that really entails in its ritualistic aspect, worshipping. In a lot of cultures, water, rivers, water bodies are considered mothers or goddesses. Fetching water, a lot of women felt that in their culture, women are very tied to water resources because they have to go fetch water, and that's a back-breaking exercise. But not only that, it brings them closer to understanding the connection between climate disruption and water. And food. They also mention how water connects them to some of the favorite dishes that they have in different seasons. And during climate distress or periods of drought and floods, they miss out on that aspect of food and community and the sense of belonging and cultural identity as well. And then, like Mariam mentioned, these emotional states of calmness, of play, of being happy, dancing in the rain, spiritual, religious, all of that. But they also said that sometimes water does evoke anxiety. And that was something that we also looked at, because large bodies of water, people are scared of water, they have fear around water, especially the depths of the ocean. But then also because of migration and because of people who've been impacted by water in that way, it does also bring about a slight sense of anxiety around water. But I would also like to mention that there was so much of diversity in the participation. We had participants from Ghana, from Nigeria, Afghanistan, India, Pakistan, Kenya, and it was wonderful to have them be open and talk about their own experiences. I think that there's a lot of vulnerability there, and only when you're open and vulnerable can you reach a state where you are open to that spiritual experience that comes with understanding and really taking in the practice of Odissi. But yes, I think I'm going to wrap up now, because I feel like we need to have some space for the Q&A and any other points that we might want to touch upon. So thank you.
Wow, that's really nice, and so nice to hear both of you conduct this workshop-based teaching learning. And it reminds me of the kind of workshops which I do. They are quite dry when I now listen to both of you, because two of my very popular workshops are I Am Water and We Like Water. And having this touch of Odissi, I could see how it can make a huge difference. May I just request you to close also the PowerPoint so that we can have ourselves on the screen now and not sitting on one corner of the screen. Thank you. It's really heartening to see how you experienced it, both for the participants, but also your way of learning, and I could feel it from the excitement you have it. And thank you so much for organizing it, because the water education has to come beyond science and technology in many ways, as you both have reflected in your collective reflections, that people do feel about from peace to anxiety. I mean, we have the whole spectrum of how what people feel it, and then when we start talking about dealing with water problems, we end up talking about engineering and scientific solutions, whereas there is much more to water than we talk about water in our everyday water management and policy practice. It was really good to see how you structured your workshop in terms of planes, like listening to the river, like the grounding part, translating into the movement, then translating into emotions, and translating into Odissi. And I completely understand when you have a set of participants from such diverse background who do not have A, B, C, X, Y, Z of Odissi. You are challenged to introduce a dance form or an art form to them right in the beginning, and how to interweave the river, the issues of water with the dance form. And as we also already know, Odissi is one of the 8 most classic dance forms in the country, in India, well respected among the national dance forms. And most of the dance forms, if you look at our Friday Waters sessions, where we have had artists like you all, artists and scholars who are teaching. I just recall in the October, and we had Professor Chirag, my own good friend from Ahmedabad University, how he is teaching art form, doing, and including street theaters and all, how important it becomes to really shape the participants into that form. And it has to be very gentle, very slow, just the way river would like to flow. And it's not easy as a trainer. I can completely understand when I'm doing it in the dry way. So now I'm thinking about the way we do is like a hardscape way, and the way you did is like a softscape way. We also talk about in that way, and the most important part is by the end of it, giving them a sense of agency to express themselves. I mean, for me, that is also equally important. Unless and until you are feeling about it, you may be one of the big, most renowned policy maker or scientist. If you are not feeling it, you are not really still there with the water. And the fact that you make them work with the sari also makes it very interesting for me to really learn here, make them discuss. And I was already imagining if I could organize a workshop in my next water festival, where we have a sari and everybody is holding it and trying to appropriate it just the way we appropriate river, and the sari will fall apart. I was already imagining organizing a workshop in my water festivals. And then it will also give them a learning that what is exactly happening with river as a resource, where we all are really extracting as much as possible, thinking as if it is just for our appropriation and forgetting completely other things. But you bring them to a table with 3 saris, not 4, in the 4 group, where they are made to learn about collective action. So, and I know, Anisha, you are also Elinor Ostrom influenced person like me. So we know that this is kind of a game theory played in an artistic way, for that matter, And when they get into that table of negotiation or doing collective action to share this common resource as rivers, it also learns them, as Mariam was mentioning, the emphatic way of negotiating and learning about scarcity and learning about how to come to a common understanding or consensus, how to share the resource. And I think I can completely relate that 3 hours is very less, because most of the participants sitting coming to this kind of workshops also don't even think about that water has to be taught. That's my experience from India, having conducted more than 50 workshops around water in the last 5 or 6 years. When they come into the workshop space, they have literally no clue what exactly are we going to talk about water. Especially they come with a prejudice that we are going to talk about building dams, building riverfronts, or designing some waterfront, and appropriating water for drinking or drainage. So we have a very limited outlook to look at rivers and water bodies, and that is also creating a kind of prejudice the way water should be taught, or the knowledge should be exchanged between all of us. And very well put by both of you, that unless and until we start discussing water, not only from the concerned side, because you both know, as water scholars and practitioners, actually water education came to the limelight only in last couple of decades, when water crisis started. The whole education is around water crisis, not really celebrating water for its very being as it is. But when you push, or when you navigate the participants to talk about water in an emotional way, then the components of calm, peace, life, everything, they slowly take time to come to that. And of course, now anxiety is also very common discussion which is happening. And I will take the last line, which I could feel from both of you, that bringing participants to that point where they feel open and vulnerable to express themselves. Maybe the time was short, and I also feel every time in my workshop, this 90 minutes, 2 hours, or even one day workshops I have conducted, they are always short. They are always short because we don't know how participants will come back, but at the same time, we also don't know how deep the participants will get into the mode where we would like them to get. So I will open the floor with some questions, as I was also getting carried away. So I presented my experience of holding these workshops in a very dry way than the way you both did. I would like to know, when the participants joined in the beginning, and by the end of it, when they were discussing and negotiating with each other, did you see a difference in their body gesture about talking about water, about the concern in their group? Did you notice that kind of difference in the way they were really taking the subject as they had entered the workshop? Any experience on that? Did they go back with some heavy heart, or some excitement, or something learned, or it was just another workshop? Because this kind of workshops can be really moving for people. Huh?
Mariam, would you like to go first, or should I start?
Go for it.
Okay, I was just going to say, of course, I have more tangible feedback from the students, because most of them, the participants, were my students, and they relayed back on the experience. So, of course, I was overwhelmingly positive. But in the sense of observing how their body language and the kind of tensions changed around the room before and after. So initially, when we started, everybody was sat in a circle,
Hmm.
and even the space in itself, because there's a lot of research done on how we use space as well.
Yes,
So even
absolutely.
so even that space felt unopened. So it's almost like this portal. I mean, at the risk of sounding really whimsical, but it's also not just opening your mind and your body, but when you're transferring this kind of emotion into emotional planes, you automatically change your body language through that process. So we did see that happening during the course. And the funny thing is that we had decided that we'd use only half of this space. And because, we thought, okay, with these many participants, we need just half of the room, because it was a huge room relative to the size of the participants. And then towards the end, we realized that we ended up using the entire room.
Yeah.
And I think that in itself talks a lot about how open and how free participants felt to move around and to take it from small movements. Like, for instance, if you're doing the Mayura, which is the peacock, the plume of the peacock, to then doing more kind of longer movements. So I would say, yeah, practically, we could see them being a little more open in their body language. Mariam, what do you think?
Yeah, so I think, at the beginning of the workshop, actually, most of the participants didn't realize that they would be participating in the workshop.
Yeah, that's another interesting part.
So I think they were a little bit surprised actually at first when they realized that they would actually be um, moving their bodies in the workshop. And, the first kind of connecting exercises where we were standing in a circle, was, you could sense there was a little bit of discomfort. But then as the workshop progressed, I really remember, for example, when we were in the section where I was giving them the specific Odissi tools for the way that they can express and denote different things. Everyone was so at ease. Everyone was really just giving it a go very, very wholeheartedly. So there was definitely this sense of opening and openness to the principles and the concepts that we were trying to communicate. Um, and I think, setting that safe space at the beginning was a really important part of that, and really giving participants a voice to share their own personal experiences as well. I think that really helps them to feel like, this is a space where I can really express myself and communicate and, connect with the concepts that we were working with.
Yeah, let me ask a question related to Odissi, because as we know, it's one of the oldest dance forms from second or first century probably. I don't have exact data about it, but practiced mostly in temples, and now we actually not don't have even many in India, as well as very as a regular practice of performance. It has become a niche form. But the key tech, and there is also a gender aspect into Odissi, as far as I know a little bit about Odissi. But there are some key techniques, and you also mentioned about it, the Tribhanga, the Chauk, and the Mudras. And most of the dance forms in India, as we know, the traditional dance forms are actually inspired by nature forms. It's not only Odisha, but all the dance forms. I had the fortune of even listening to Bharatnatyam artists here at Friday.Water Arts, by the way, Kathak artists, and even storytelling. And most of our dance form have been also integral part of storytelling. We had good poets and laureates who did storytelling as well, from Munshi Premchand to Rabindranath Tagore and many people. But most of our artists were always having storytelling as their foundational way of telling something, whether it is through painting or through dance form or song or flute or any instrument. What is it that both of you find interesting about this performance repertoire? I mean, you have these different forms of doing it, and then you have key techniques to perform. So I'm sure in Urishi also there are certain things which are dominant in to showcase certain gestures or certain movements. How do you really take that Tribhanga, Chauk, and Mudras when you relate with your? And I understand that students also did a bit of it. I mean, it would be nice to have a one-day workshop where in the first part they are just learning about it, and then second part after lunch probably they are just opening up and doing some more, moving around. But how do you see this dance form, and how did you come up with linking it with river education or water education, for that matter?
So I can take this one to start, Anisha, and then I'm
Go
happy
ahead.
to add anything. So I think one of the things for me from you know, Odissi coming from a very coastal region, so it's always really drawn from water, and I feel like that's really built into the heart of the dance. The way that it moves, it's very supple. It's very um, smooth in the way that the body moves within this dance form. So that's something that was one of the reasons why we even made this connection with water in the first place. And then in terms of the actual workshop and how we were trying to communicate that, I think this was where we really, you know, the parts where we were drawing in on the again, in that kind of opening part of the workshop where we, you know, we really show how we use the hands to show water in different forms. You know, because that was a big thing for myself as well, and Anisha, when we were planning the workshop, is, you know, how do we actually get people to feel through Odissi the sense of water. So it was, yeah, these really just finding there's actually very simple ways that we use water, that we use gesture, and we use our bodies to represent water. You know, simplicity actually is so powerful, especially when you're trying to teach something that's very complex.
Absolutely,
So
that's what I'm
yeah,
thinking. People with no
yeah,
background. I'm imagining
yeah,
myself sitting there, but with a water background, but
yeah,
with no
exactly.
Odissi background.
Yeah, so really just finding, okay, what are just the very simple things that we can draw from? Very simple imagery of water, you know, this one, and then you also have, you know, this one where you have in front showing these kind of
This
channels.
is like we do
Um,
in childhood also, naturally.
yeah,
It
it's very
comes
very
genetically to all of
playful.
us. Yeah.
Yeah, so this was how I really kind of tried to bring the participants into that. And you could really see, especially in the water pranam section, you know, there was this feeling of you know, Odissi, the way that it moves, it is, you know, is almost like it's moving through water. It's moving through some a very kind of like viscous kind of material. And you really got a sense of that, the way that people were moving, and you know, by that part of the workshop, you know, they've seen some Odissi, they've moved a little bit with their hands, they've also felt a little, expressed their own kind of gesture a little bit, and you know, they were all moving in this very kind of smooth, soft way, which was like, yeah, it was very beautiful to see.
That itself
Yeah.
is, something they are probably unlearning what they have been doing in classrooms.
Yeah, yeah.
There is some aspect in Odissi also, which you both have also expressed, the Abhinay part, and by the end of your workshop, you also come to that moksha part or symbolizing liberation. And of course, with the performance and doing water sharing. At the same time, you also did talk about the Bhumi Pranam and Jal Pranam. I think you used the word water Pranam or Jal Pranam. Do you think that if we all actually grew up with this kind of education, we would have had a very different outlook towards our water bodies the way we do today, looking at it as only a resource that we can appropriate as much as possible. We have lost that sense of spiritual connect, and I will say that has also actually brought us to the spiritual cage, and we don't feel liberated, or we have also, in our personal lives as well, because that's your first part or first plane of your workshop where you are talking about moving your body and understanding yourself before even understanding the river. How do you think it would be different if this kind of work of education is actually brought in the schools where we are still having tender minds and bodies, because now if I have to learn about it's not about learning Odissi dance form, it is about learning the empathy which you are actually trying to showcase, and you use the word peace building, resilience, and these are all like based on the foundation of having empathy. What's your take on this? Do you have experience of doing it in with school children or something like that?
I'll just start. There's so many points there, Mansi. I feel like I just want
Yes.
to jump in and
Please, please. I also feel like we should really talk more about these things. So
very
much
feels
to
like we're just
do.
us talking about our, experiences around, dance and water. So, I would definitely say that there is um, an unlearning and a relearning when it
Mm.
comes to looking at water and experiencing these emotions that come forth in a very different way when you do it in adulthood.
Yes.
And with Odissi, again, this is, answering the question that you posed before, was when we learned Odissi as a practice, it was very different. So it was
Mm.
very structured, it was very strict, it was very systematic.
Mm.
And I'm not saying that the beauty was lost in that process, but we had to learn it in that rigorous way to really understand
Absolutely.
and hold on to that practice, because that is it's important to do that. So that
Mm.
structured way is important. And what we wanted to do here, as I said earlier as well, is to dismantle that kind of um, lack of accessibility around what these classical dance forms are. And there's two things in that process. First is Odissi, it originated in temples, as we know, for
Yes.
the most part, but it wasn't accessible to the local, to the
Yes.
normal public. And to be able to do that now, and to be able to not just educate, but expose
Yes.
people to that dance form
Bring
in
it to
itself,
mainstream.
yeah, in itself is important, but also that the tradition that initially when the Devadasis, who were these performers in the temples, were banned during colonial rule,
Hmm.
men actually
They
dressed as,
they dressed like women. Yes.
yes, the Gothical tradition. And you
I
see that
remember it.
it's so fluid. Even gender within Odissi is so
Yes.
fluid, and it really tugs at a lot of the dominant Western perspectives that we know about education,
Hmm.
from the get-go itself. So
Yes.
the second point to answer, which is, uh, do, if children were brought up learning about water, emotions, and nature in a different way, would we be in a different place? Of course we'd be in a different place, but also the education system has its own drawbacks and flaws. And the way that power structures function, and with the advent of kind of hegemonic ideas and how
Yes.
capitalism works, it's all very difficult to really de tangle from that. But I have actually taught deaf students and hearing impaired students back in the past. So I've done Odissi workshops with them. And that was, we probably need another session to talk about that. But it
Oh,
was, uh, I mean, a completely marvelous experience doing that. Yeah, so that's what I wanted to add. And I know Mariam also has a lot to say. And yeah, I'll just hand over to her.
Maria.
um, I think Anisha's captured it well. I think yeah, I'll leave that there.
Okay, because the way the world is going on, I feel we would have been very different actually if art-based education was more dominant than science and tech-based. I am not against science and tech, but in the last 100 years, I see that post-industrial revolution or in the urbanization process, there is so much of focus on everything to the machine learning that there is some point in time that every one of us are actually forgetting at the end of the day we are one of the biodiversity species coexisting with nature with other species, and that is where empathy comes very important learning, which is not part of even education. I mean, the whole education is all about employment, learning the tools and techniques and strategies, and that is where I also feel learning some art form, if it is compulsory, the art like some sports, like in India, we are also lacking in sports matters as well. It anyway charts a more humanistic, you know, people in the society than more machine-like people in the society who are looking at rivers and mountains and forest. As we see right now in India, rivers are getting riverfront developments, forests are getting cut, mountains are de-designated as mountains. They will no more be called mountains, so open for mining, and natural forests are getting cut. And I think this is where I am so much convinced about art as an important medium of education, and not as an optional or elective medium of education. I mean, the way you both also presented, if you can you really not can, but you experienced yourself as a collective reflection, that if 3 hours of teaching learning can bring such kind of interaction with the participants, of course if it is 3 days, 3 years or 13 years of education, it is going to make a huge difference in building humans in the society rather than building insensible. My heart really burns out, and I'm talking about when you talk about peace and resilience building, the number of children we have lost in last 3-4 years in the wars. It really feels so helpless, and I feel how world leaders are not really looking at the way peace should be looked at, looking at the way the world. And we know from history that art has been the major driver of reforms, and it's we may consider science and technology as drivers of reforms, but if we look at the way we talk about human behavioral change, we talk about peace, art has come very, much at the center of it. When I see this, I feel much more motivated and convinced when I meet people like you that yes, we have to have more of such education. We have to have more of such scholars who are bringing this special art or skills you have and transcending it. So when Anisha used the word dismantling, I was actually going to jump and say that you transcended the knowledge you had and you brought it into the science of collective action, science of river management too for that. So it's an added body of knowledge, and so well put that it was kind of a niche practice, and it is so important that everyone of us knows some sports and enjoys some sports and knows some art forms and enjoys that and practices that in everyday life. And that's the whole thing. I am so convinced that we need to do Friday Water Arts in this format, and share with people that water education is not about only building dams, bridges, and water tanks and wastewater treatment, but it is also about building feelings, learning to do peace, learning to work together, learning, and it cannot come only from the classroom. It has to be special courses the way you are doing, because having them as a mainstream education in India, we are still far. I don't know about the West, the UK, the Europe. I am sitting in Germany right now. The world actually is far behind taking art in the mainstream education, and it becomes a niche, and I think it has to be well integrated in the mainstream education. Even if I am learning mathematics as one of my main subject, art has to be another main subject. It cannot be either or. And that is where I feel a contribution of people like you extremely important. And I think it's a good time we give it a close for today, because we all three of us will get carried away with these kind of conversations as we have been conducting workshops around water. Much more to discuss about it, much more there at W4W. We will continue this conversation ongoing, and we have been doing dry sessions, and for me Friday Waters becomes extremely interesting, because then we are talking about something different, and I am learning how water can be taught in different ways, because I am not taught in the way I would like to really be taught in my lifetime. But anyway, I'm learning from people like you. So thank you so much, Mariam and Anisha, for this wonderful session. Before I let you go, I would like to announce for the next week session. Next week on Monday, Munching and Musing with Women for Water on February 12th, which is a World Wetlands Day. At 5 p.m. IST, we shall interact with Dr. Veena Srinivasan. very renowned water scientist from India. On that day itself at Wilhelmshaven, I am also organizing a wetland walk on the Warden Sea with the University of Oldenburg people and people of Wilhelmshaven here. That's on site, not online. So next week, also on Wednesdays for Water, our signature series on 4th of February, we are going to discuss the riverfront at Guwahati, and we talk about the rivers Brahmaputra and Bharalu, which shape the life and the livelihood of people of Guwahati. That's on February 4th at 5 p.m. IST. Thank you so much once again to all the participants who are there on live and here, and also thank you so much Anisha and Mariam for this wonderful session, and I wish you all the best for your future workshops. I hope we can do something together in future. Thank you. Bye bye.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
Mansi. Bye.
Bye.